An entire football team disappeared after a championship until a tourist spotted a familiar jersey in a remote village and made a shocking discovery. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The rusted wipers fought against the drizzle as Emma Thompson squinted through the windshield, her knuckles white around the steering wheel. The narrow mountain roads of Oregon twisted ahead of her like a snake, each bend potentially hiding the answer she'd spent 5 years searching for. On the passenger seat lay a crumpled map, a red X marking what could be her last hope of finding her brother Jason. "Just a little farther," she whispered to herself, glancing briefly at the dashboard photo of a smiling young man in a green and yellow jersey, the number 12 bold across his chest. The Riverside Eagles' star quarterback, her little brother, who vanished along with the entire team 5 years ago after their state championship victory. Emma ignored the growing rumble of thunder in the distance. The meteorologists had warned about severe storms hitting the mountains, but weather was the least of her concerns. She'd already spent her last savings on this trip, following a lead everyone else had dismissed as meaningless. A tourist claiming to have spotted someone wearing the distinctive green and yellow Eagles jersey with the number 12 in this remote region. The car shuddered beneath her, the engine making an ominous knocking sound that had been growing progressively worse over the last hour. "Please, not now," she muttered, patting the dashboard as if the 15-year-old sedan might respond to encouragement. A flash of lightning illuminated the dense forest surrounding the road, and Emma caught sight of a weathered sign ahead. "Pinewood, 5 km." Relief flooded through her until the engine coughed, sputtered, and went silent. The car rolled to a stop despite her desperate attempts to restart it. "No, no, no!" Emma slammed her palm against the steering wheel. The timing couldn't have been worse. No cell service, an approaching storm, and 5 kilometers still to go. She tried the ignition again, but the engine only clicked feebly in response. With a resigned sigh, Emma grabbed her backpack and the waterproof folder containing her brother's photos and newspaper clippings about the accident. The first drops of rain were already growing heavier as she locked the car and began walking toward Pinewood. By the time the small cluster of wooden buildings came into view, Emma was soaked to the skin. The rain had penetrated her light jacket, and her hiking boots squished with every step. Pinewood looked like a relic from another era. A main street with a handful of shops, a small diner, and homes scattered among the trees. Several people hurried indoors as the storm intensified, casting curious glances at the bedraggled stranger in their midst. Emma made her way to what appeared to be the town's only gas station, which doubled as a small grocery store. A bell jingled as she pushed open the door, and the middle-aged man behind the counter looked up with the mild interest of someone who rarely saw new faces. "Car trouble?" he asked, eyeing her wet clothes. Emma nodded, pushing her damp hair from her face. "Broke down about 5 kilometers back. Any chance there's a mechanic in town?" "That'd be Hank, but he won't be going out in this weather." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're that woman, aren't you? The one who's been calling around asking about some outsider?" Emma's pulse quickened. "I've been looking for someone who might be wearing a Riverside Eagles jersey, number 12. It's important." The man's expression closed off immediately. "Nobody here likes strangers poking around, asking questions. We mind our business in Pinewood." "It's my brother," Emma said, pulling out a slightly damp photograph and placing it on the counter. "He disappeared 5 years ago when the team's bus went missing in the mountains after the state championship. The authorities called off the search, said it was a landslide, but I never believed." "You should leave it alone," the man interrupted, deliberately looking away from the photo. "Whatever happened up in those mountains, it's best left there." Before Emma could respond, the bell jingled again as a gray-bearded man in a worn flannel jacket entered, shaking rain from his hat. He gave Emma an appraising look before nodding to the clerk. "Evening, Pete. Got those nails I ordered?" The clerk seemed relieved by the interruption. In the back, Morgan, I'll get them. As Pete disappeared into a storeroom, the newcomer turned to Emma. Couldn't help overhearing. You're looking for someone wearing an Eagles jersey? Emma's heart jumped. Yes. Number 12, have you seen him? Morgan stroked his beard thoughtfully. Might be Mrs. Reed's boy you're talking about. He keeps to himself, doesn't talk to anyone, lives in a cabin at the end of the valley. I need to see him, Emma insisted, her voice rising with urgency. I have reason to believe he might be my brother. Impossible. Morgan shook his head firmly. He arrived here years ago, more dead than alive. Doesn't remember anything from before. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. What do you mean, doesn't remember? Morgan glanced toward the storeroom door, then lowered his voice. Look, I can take you to the cabin tomorrow if the weather clears, but don't get your hopes up. The boy Mrs. Reed took in. He's been through something terrible. Whatever he was before, that person is gone. That night, Emma barely slept in the small room she'd rented at Pinewood's only boarding house. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows and mirroring the turmoil in her mind. Could it really be Jason? After all this time? The authorities had declared all 14 people aboard the bus dead after months of fruitless searching. The official report cited a landslide during heavy rains, theorizing the bus had been swept into a ravine so deep recovery was impossible. Her phone chimed, a rare moment of service despite the storm. Her parents' number flashed on the screen, and Emma answered with reluctance. Where are you, Emma? Her mother's voice sounded tired, worn down by years of grief. Mrs. Wilson said you quit your job and cleaned out your apartment. I'm following a lead, Mom. A real one this time. Her father's voice joined in. Emma, sweetheart, we've talked about this. It's been 5 years. We need to accept that Jason is gone. This obsession is destroying your life. No, Dad. This time it's different. I found someone wearing his jersey. A heavy sigh came through the speaker. Emma, her father said gently, you promised your therapist you'd stop with the conspiracy theories. The accident was a tragedy, but there's no elaborate cover-up, no survivors hiding in the mountains. I'm not crazy, Emma shouted, immediately regretting her outburst. More softly, she added, I just need to see for myself. I'll call you tomorrow. She ended the call before they could respond, tossing the phone onto the nightstand. Everyone thought she was obsessed, unable to accept reality. Maybe they were right. Maybe this whole trip was just another desperate attempt to deny the truth. But something had never felt right about Jason's disappearance, and this lead, as tenuous as it was, felt different. The next morning dawned clear, the storm having moved on overnight. Emma met Morgan at the gas station as arranged, noting how the entire town seemed to pause and stare as they climbed into his truck. They're not used to outsiders, Morgan explained as they drove along a muddy forest road, especially ones asking questions. How did Mrs. Reed's boy end up here? Emma asked, clutching her folder of photographs. Morgan kept his eyes on the difficult road. Found him in the mountains 5 years back, more dead than alive. Burns, broken bones, delirious with fever. Mrs. Reed was a nurse before her husband died. She took him in, nursed him back to health. Took months before he could even stand again. And he doesn't talk? At all? The trauma damaged his vocal cords. That's what Doc Harris says anyway. Could be psychological, too. The boy communicates with notes, gestures. Mrs. Reed understands him best. They drove in silence for a while before Morgan continued. He's got no memory of his life before. Nothing. Fresh start, I guess, though, with those scars. Not an easy one. Emma felt a knot forming in her stomach. Scars? Burns, mostly. Right side of his face, down his arm and torso. Whatever happened to him, he went through hell to survive it. The truck rounded a final bend. revealing a small log cabin nestled against the trees beside a stream. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a figure was visible in the yard, splitting wood with rhythmic strokes of an axe. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Even from this distance, she could see the unmistakable green and yellow jersey the young man wore, the number 12 visible on his back. He was taller than she remembered Jason being, but 5 years could change so much. Before Morgan could stop her, Emma was out of the truck, her feet carrying her forward almost involuntarily. "Jason!" she called out, her voice cracking with emotion. "Jason, is that you?" The young man froze mid-swing, then slowly turned around. Emma stopped abruptly, several yards still between them. His face was partially hidden by a scraggly beard and hood, but there was something in his stance, the way he held himself, that seemed achingly familiar. Their eyes met across the distance, and the axe slipped from the young man's hands, thudding into the soft earth. In a heartbeat, he spun around and bolted toward the cabin, disappearing inside with a slam of the door. "Wait! Please!" Emma ran forward, pounding on the door desperately as tears streamed down her face. "Jason, it's me, Emma, your sister." An elderly woman appeared from around the side of the cabin, her face lined with concern and anger. "Stop that. You're frightening him." "Mrs. Reed," Morgan called, hurrying up behind Emma. "This woman believes your boy might be her brother." "My son is ill," Mrs. Reed said firmly. "He doesn't remember anything from before and can't bear strangers. The scars, they affected him deeply." Emma wiped tears from her cheeks with shaking hands. "Please," she said, pulling the photograph from her folder. "This is my brother Jason. He disappeared 5 years ago when the bus carrying his team vanished in the mountains." Mrs. Reed's expression softened slightly as she looked at the photo of the smiling young quarterback. "The scars changed his face a great deal," she said quietly. "You may be disappointed by what you see." "I need to see him," Emma insisted. "Please." After a long moment, Mrs. Reed nodded once and approached the door. She knocked gently. "Thomas," she called softly, "it's all right. She just wants to talk to you. You don't have to say anything." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before the door's lock clicked and slowly swung open. The young man stood in the shadows of the cabin, head bowed, the right side of his face turned away. "Thomas," Emma whispered, taking a tentative step forward. The young man finally raised his head, allowing her to see his face fully. The right side was marked by deep burn scars that pulled at his features, partially closing one eye. But as their gazes locked, Emma saw the unmistakable blue eyes of her brother, though one was now partially obscured by the scarred tissue. Before she could speak, the young man reached for a notepad on a nearby table, scribbled something quickly, and held it up for her to read. "I'm not who you think. My name is Thomas." Emma stared at the note in disbelief, her heart pounding against her ribs. Despite the scar tissue, distorting half his face, those eyes, she would recognize them anywhere. The same blue eyes that had looked up to her throughout childhood, now clouded with fear and confusion. "Jason," she whispered, reaching out instinctively. Thomas flinched away from her touch, backing further into the cabin's shadows. His hands trembled as he clutched the notepad to his chest like a shield. "Please," Emma implored, "just let me talk to you for a few minutes." Mrs. Reed stepped between them, her protective stance reminiscent of a mother bear. "I think you should leave now. He's clearly distressed." Morgan placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Come on. This isn't helping anyone." Reluctantly, Emma allowed herself to be guided away from the cabin door, though her eyes never left the scarred face of the man she was certain was her brother. Just before Mrs. Reed closed the door, Emma caught a final glimpse of Thomas watching her, his one good eye wide with something that might have been recognition, or simply fear. "It can't be coincidence," Emma insisted as she and Morgan walked back toward his truck. The forest path seemed longer on the return journey, each step taking her farther from what might be her only chance to reconnect with Jason. Same eyes, same height, wearing the team jersey. And why doesn't he speak? Morgan sighed heavily, negotiating a muddy section of the trail before answering. The trauma damaged his vocal cords. That's what Doc Harris told Mrs. Reed when she first brought him in. When they found him, he had severe burns, broken bones, and was delirious with fever. Took months until he could even stand again. But don't you think it's strange? A young man with no memory appears in these remote mountains around the same time my brother's team vanishes without a trace, wearing the exact same jersey number. Life's full of strange coincidences, Morgan replied noncommittally, though Emma noticed he wouldn't meet her eyes. That night, Emma couldn't sleep in the small boarding house room. She paced the creaking floorboards, reviewing everything she knew about her brother's disappearance. The official report cited a landslide during severe weather, claiming the search was hampered by dangerous conditions and the vastness of the wilderness. No wreckage was ever found, no bodies recovered. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed the bus and everyone aboard. Her phone rang, breaking her reverie. The signal was weak but sufficient for her parents' worried voices to come through clearly. "Emma, honey, we've been trying to reach you for hours," her mother said, anxiety evident in every syllable. "Are you still chasing that lead in Oregon?" "Mom, I found him," Emma said, her voice catching. "Or at least I found someone who might be him. He's calling himself Thomas now, and his face is... He's been injured, but those eyes..." "Emma, darling," her father interrupted gently, "we've talked about this. Your therapist said these obsessive quests aren't healthy." "I'm not obsessed," Emma protested, louder than she intended. "Dad, this isn't like the other times. He's wearing Jason's jersey, the actual jersey with the number 12. How would some random stranger get that?" Her mother's voice trembled when she spoke again. "Emma, please. We've finally started to heal. These false hopes. They're tearing open wounds that were just beginning to close." "They're not false," Emma insisted, fighting back tears. "I know how it sounds, but I need you to trust me this time." "Emma," her father began, his tone laden with the familiar combination of patience and pity that made her stomach clench. "I have to go," she said abruptly. "The signal here is terrible. I'll call when I know more." She ended the call before they could respond, tossing the phone onto the bed in frustration. No one believed her, not the authorities, not her parents, not even Morgan. But she knew what she had seen, and she wasn't leaving Pinewood until she uncovered the truth. The next morning dawned clear, the storm's remnants nothing but puddles and damp earth. Emma rose early, determination renewed after a night of fitful sleep. If no one would help her, she would find answers herself. She made her way back to the Reed cabin, this time on foot. The hike took nearly 2 hours, but Emma barely noticed the distance, her mind consumed with what she would say when she arrived. This time she approached more carefully, stopping at the tree line to observe from a distance. Thomas was outside again, tending to a small vegetable garden alongside Mrs. Reed. Even from this distance, Emma could see how gently he moved, as if each action required careful consideration. The green and yellow jersey was gone, replaced by a simple flannel shirt. Taking a deep breath, Emma stepped into the clearing. Mrs. Reed spotted her immediately, straightening with a frown while Thomas froze, trowel in hand. "I thought I made myself clear yesterday," Mrs. Reed called, moving to stand between Thomas and the approaching visitor. "Please," Emma said, stopping at a respectful distance. "I'm not here to cause trouble, I just want to talk." "He's agitated since yesterday," Mrs. Reed replied, her voice softening slightly. "Spent the night having nightmares." Emma felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset him, but please understand. If he's my brother, I've spent 5 years believing he was dead." Mrs. Reed studied her for a long moment, then turned to Thomas, who had remained motionless throughout the exchange. "What do you think, Thomas? It's your choice." Thomas hesitated, eyes darting between the two women. Finally, he gave a small, reluctant nod. 10 minutes, Mrs. Reed said firmly to Emma, "and if he shows any sign of distress, you leave immediately." Inside the cabin, Emma noted how sparsely furnished yet meticulously clean everything was. Thomas sat by the window, staring out at the mountains while nervously fidgeting with a piece of string. "I won't force you to remember," Emma promised, taking a seat across from him. "I just want to know you." Thomas turned to look at her, his good eye searching her face. After a moment, he reached for his notepad and wrote, "Why do you think I'm your brother?" "You have his eyes," Emma said simply. "And you're wearing his jersey, number 12. My brother was wearing that exact jersey when he disappeared 5 years ago." Thomas wrote again, "I don't remember anything before waking up here. Mrs. Reed says my memory might never come back." "That's okay," Emma assured him, though her heart ached at the thought. "Memory or not, if you're Jason, you're still my brother." Over the next few days, Emma established a routine of visiting the cabin, each time staying a little longer, as Thomas gradually became more comfortable with her presence. Mrs. Reed watched their interactions with a mixture of concern and grudging acceptance. "He's never opened up like this to anyone," the elderly woman confessed one afternoon as they watched Thomas sketch in his notebook on the porch. "But I worry what these memories might do to him if they return." Emma found herself similarly conflicted. The joy of potentially finding Jason alive warred with her fear of causing him further harm. If forcing memories might trigger a crisis, was it worth the risk? She sought out Dr. Harris, the local physician, hoping for professional insight. The doctor, a weathered man with kind eyes, received her in his modest clinic. "Memory loss from trauma is complex," he explained carefully. "The brain sometimes blocks memories as a protective mechanism. In Thomas's case, or Jason if that's truly who he is, the combination of physical trauma and whatever psychological horrors he experienced may have created a defensive amnesia." "But he could remember eventually, right?" Emma asked hopefully. Dr. Harris sighed. "Perhaps or perhaps not. And I must caution you, if those memories return suddenly rather than gradually, the psychological shock could be severe. There's a reason the mind buried them in the first place." Emma left the clinic with a heavier heart. She found herself torn between her desperate desire to reclaim her brother and her fear of shattering the fragile peace he seemed to have found as Thomas. On her 5th day in Pinewood, Emma brought her phone to the cabin, hoping to gently introduce Thomas to images from Jason's past. They sat together on the porch steps while Mrs. Reed worked nearby, close enough to intervene if necessary. "These are our parents," Emma explained, showing him a recent photo. "And this was our house growing up." Thomas studied each image with intense concentration, occasionally touching the screen as if trying to connect physically with the scenes displayed. He showed no sign of recognition, but neither did he seem distressed. Encouraged, Emma continued scrolling through her photo gallery until she came to a team picture of the Riverside Eagles. "This was Jason's team," she said carefully. "The Riverside Eagles. They had just won the state championship when—" Her voice trailed off as she noticed Thomas's sudden stillness. His eyes were fixed on the photo, particularly on the trophy the team proudly displayed. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. "Thomas?" Emma asked worriedly. "Are you okay?" His breathing had become rapid and shallow. Slowly, almost mechanically, he raised his hand to point at the team photo, his finger trembling as it hovered over the image of the team captain standing next to Jason, both beaming with triumph. Then, to Emma's shock, Thomas spoke, his voice a raspy, painful whisper forced through damaged vocal cords. "Eagles! Champions!" "You remember!" Emma exclaimed, hope surging through her. The moment shattered instantly. Thomas clutched his head with both hands, doubling over, as if in physical pain. A terrible sound tore from his throat. Not words, but a raw, agonized cry. He fell to his knees, body convulsing, as Mrs. Reed came running from the garden. "What have you done?" the elderly woman cried, rushing to Thomas's side and cradling him as he shook. "I just showed him a photo," Emma tried to explain, horrified by the reaction. "He remembered something. He spoke. Out!" Mrs. Reed shouted, fury and fear mingling in her expression. "Get out now! You're destroying everything we've built here!" Emma backed away, watching helplessly as Thomas rocked back and forth in Mrs. Reed's arms, his eyes unseeing, locked in some internal horror she had unwittingly unleashed. That evening, Emma sat alone in the small tavern at the edge of town, nursing a drink she barely tasted. Morgan found her there, sliding onto the neighboring stool with a concerned expression. "The whole village is talking," he said quietly. "They're saying you're trying to take Mrs. Reed's son away." "He's my brother, Morgan," Emma replied, her voice hoarse from crying. "I'm sure of it now." Morgan sighed deeply. "And if he is, what then? Do you plan to drag him back to a life he doesn't remember? Look around, Emma." He found peace here. Emma stared into her glass, catching sight of her reflection in the amber liquid. When she prepared for this journey, she had imagined a joyful reunion, perhaps challenges in reintroducing Jason to his old life, but nothing like this. She hadn't contemplated that finding him might be the easy part, and knowing what to do afterward would be the true dilemma. The next morning, Emma discovered the Reed cabin empty, the windows shuttered and door locked. Alarmed, she searched throughout the village until Dr. Harris approached her in the small general store. "Thomas had a breakdown," he informed her gravely. "He's in the clinic, sedated. Mrs. Reed doesn't want you to see him again." As Emma absorbed this news, her gaze fell on a newspaper someone had left on the counter. There, in the bottom corner of the local paper, was a small photograph that made her blood run cold. When she prepared to leave the store, she noticed Thomas's sketchbook had fallen open on the counter, revealing a detailed drawing of a school bus engulfed in flames tumbling down a mountainside. Emma stared at the sketchbook, her fingers trembling as she traced the outline of the burning bus. The drawing was disturbingly detailed, flames curling around twisted metal, a steep mountainside, and small figures caught in the inferno. Only someone who had witnessed such horror firsthand could have captured it with such awful precision. "He remembers more than he lets on," she whispered to herself, quickly closing the sketchbook when the store owner glanced her way. Outside, the morning sun did little to warm Emma as she marched determinedly toward the village clinic. Despite Dr. Harris's warning, she had to see Thomas. Jason, she corrected herself mentally. The more evidence she gathered, the more certain she became. The clinic was a modest white building at the edge of Pinewood, barely distinguishable from the surrounding houses except for the small red cross painted on its sign. Emma hesitated at the entrance, rehearsing what she would say, how she might convince Dr. Harris to let her see Thomas, despite Mrs. Reed's objections. "He's heavily sedated," Dr. Harris informed her when she finally worked up the courage to enter. The doctor looked tired, his white coat wrinkled as if he'd been wearing it all night. "Even if I allowed you to see him, which I won't, he wouldn't recognize you." "Doctor, I need to understand what's happening to him," Emma pleaded. "These episodes, the drawing of the bus crash, it's all connected to my brother's disappearance." Dr. Harris removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Trauma impacts the brain in complex ways, Miss Thompson. If your brother and Thomas are indeed the same person, what he experienced was immense. The brain sometimes blocks memories to protect itself. But they're coming back now, aren't they, because of me?" "Perhaps," he admitted reluctantly, "but forcing them could trigger a dangerous psychological crisis. Memory recovery should happen gradually in a controlled therapeutic environment." Emma leaned against the reception desk, suddenly exhausted. "I never meant to hurt him. I just wanted to find my brother." "I believe you," Dr. Harris said gently. "But what Thomas needs now is stability, not more emotional upheaval." For the next 2 days, Emma kept her distance from the clinic, instead spending her time gathering what information she could about Thomas's arrival in Pinewood. Most villagers were reluctant to speak with her, turning away or changing subjects when she approached. Their protectiveness of Thomas and Mrs. Reed formed an almost impenetrable barrier. Morgan remained her only ally, though he too seemed torn between helping Emma and protecting the community's secrets. They met at the small diner on Pinewood's main street, the lunch crowd thinning as afternoon approached. "People here are suspicious of outsiders," Morgan explained, stirring his coffee absently. "Always have been. But with Thomas, it's different. Everyone feels responsible for him." "Because they know who he really is," Emma suggested, keeping her voice low. Morgan's silence was confirmation enough. Emma pressed on. "I found his sketchbook. He drew the bus crash, Morgan, in detail. He remembers." "Fragments, maybe," Morgan conceded. "Dreams, nightmares. Doesn't mean he's ready to face it all." "I need to know what happened when you found him," Emma insisted. "The full story, not the sanitized version." Morgan glanced around the diner, then leaned closer. "It was during another storm, like the one when you arrived. I was checking my trapping lines up near Ridge Point when I found him. At first, I thought he was dead. Burns covering half his body, clothes in tatters except for that jersey. It was soaked in blood, but the number was still visible." Emma swallowed hard, picturing the scene. He was muttering, nonsense, delirious with fever. "I carried him back to town, straight to Mrs. Reed, since the clinic was flooded that week. She worked on him for days, barely sleeping. We all thought he would die. And when he survived? Why didn't you report finding him?" Morgan's expression darkened. "We tried after he stabilized. Called the county sheriff. They sent a deputy who took some notes, said he'd file a report. 2 weeks later, we called to follow up and were told the case was closed. Official story was no survivors, all presumed dead." "That makes no sense," Emma frowned. "A survivor would have been national news." "Unless someone didn't want him found," Morgan said, voicing the suspicion that had been growing in Emma's mind. By the 3rd day, Emma could no longer stay away from the clinic. She arrived early, hoping to catch Dr. Harris before Mrs. Reed appeared for her daily vigil at Thomas's bedside. The waiting room was empty when she entered, but she could hear voices from down the hall, Dr. Harris and Mrs. Reed, their tones urgent, though the words were indistinct. Emma moved quietly toward the sound, pausing outside what appeared to be Thomas's room. "Showing more response today," Dr. Harris was saying. "The sedatives are wearing off." "And the memories?" Mrs. Reed asked anxiously. "Still present, I'm afraid. He's been writing the same words repeatedly. Eagles and fire." Emma's heart raced. She needed to see him, to be there when he woke up properly. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. Both Dr. Harris and Mrs. Reed turned in surprise. Thomas lay in the small hospital bed, his scarred face peaceful in sleep, though his hand twitched occasionally as if reaching for something. "You shouldn't be here," Mrs. Reed said immediately, stepping between Emma and the bed. "Please," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I know I made a mistake showing him the photo so abruptly, but I can help. I know details about the team, about what happened. If his memories are coming back anyway, wouldn't it be better if someone who understands them is here?" Dr. Harris and Mrs. Reed exchanged a look that contained volumes of unspoken communication. 5 minutes, Dr. Harris finally conceded. "And only because I believe your presence might actually provide context for what he's remembering." Mrs. Reed reluctantly stepped aside, though she remained close, watching Emma's every move with hawk-like intensity. Emma approached the bed slowly, taking Thomas's hand in hers. His skin was warm, the hand calloused from work around the cabin. She spoke softly, not even sure if he could hear her. "Jason, or Thomas, whichever you prefer. I'm sorry I pushed too hard. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you remember, whatever you see in your mind, you're not alone anymore." His fingers twitched in hers, and for a moment his eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Eagle," he whispered, the word barely audible through damaged vocal cords, before drifting back to sleep. Over the next few days, a tentative truce formed between Emma and Mrs. Reed, as they both kept vigil at Thomas's bedside. His condition improved gradually. The periods of consciousness grew longer, though he remained disoriented, often staring at the ceiling as if seeing something beyond the room. Dr. Harris monitored him closely, explaining to Emma that Thomas's brain was essentially trying to reconcile two separate sets of memories: his life as Thomas in Pinewood, and the emerging fragments of his past as Jason. "The human mind isn't designed to maintain two separate identities," he explained. "Eventually, some integration must occur." "What can I do to help?" Emma asked. "Be patient. When he's ready to talk or write about what he remembers, listen without judgment. Don't push, but don't dismiss anything either." By the end of the week, Thomas was well enough to sit up, though he still tired easily. His communication remained primarily through writing, his vocal attempts limited to single words that clearly caused him pain. Emma brought him a new notebook, larger than his previous one, and he began filling it with writings and drawings, some disturbing, others mundane. One evening, as Mrs. Reed took a rare break to get dinner, Thomas wrote something and pushed the notebook toward Emma. "I see a bus. Fire. People screaming. Is that real or nightmare?" Emma's throat tightened. "It was real," she confirmed gently. "You were on a bus with your teammates. There was an accident." Thomas stared at her, his good eye searching her face. After a long moment, he wrote again. "I was Jason?" "Yes," Emma whispered. "You are my brother, Jason Thompson." He closed his eye, his expression unreadable. When he opened it again, there was a new clarity there, though tinged with profound sadness. He wrote slowly, deliberately. "Why did no one find us?" "They searched," Emma explained, fighting back tears. "For months, but the mountains are vast, and they believed a landslide had buried everything. I never stopped looking, though. Never." Thomas, Jason, reached for her hand, squeezing it weakly. The gesture, so simple yet so meaningful, broke something inside Emma. 5 years of grief, obsession, and desperate hope came pouring out as she sobbed quietly, still holding his hand. They stayed like that until Mrs. Reed returned, carrying a tray with soup and bread. She froze in the doorway, taking in the scene with a mix of concern and resignation. "He remembered something, didn't he?" she asked softly. Emma nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Later that night, Emma stepped outside the clinic for some fresh air, her mind reeling from the day's developments. The stars shone brilliantly over Pinewood, the mountain air crisp and clean. For the first time in 5 years, she felt a sense of peace, however fragile. The clinic door opened behind her, and Dr. Harris joined her, offering a steaming cup of coffee. "He's sleeping naturally now," the doctor said. "No sedatives needed." "That's good, right?" "It's progress," Dr. Harris agreed cautiously. "But there's something you should know, something I discovered while reviewing his file." Emma tensed, preparing herself for more complications. When Thomas Jason was found, the clinic took photographs to document his injuries for medical purposes, Dr. Harris explained. "I was looking through them again, and I noticed something on what remained of his jersey." "What was it?" Emma asked, her mouth suddenly dry. "Scorch marks that didn't match the pattern of his other burns," the doctor said gravely. "And a small tear that looked like, well, it looked like it might have been made by a knife or some other sharp object." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. Dr. Harris's next words confirmed Emma's growing suspicion. The accident that claimed your brother's team might not have been an accident at all. Emma stared at Dr. Harris, her mind racing with implications. Are you saying someone deliberately caused the accident? The doctor shifted uncomfortably under the starlight. I'm saying the evidence is inconsistent with a simple crash. Those marks, they suggest something more sinister. I need to see those photos, Emma insisted, her voice hardening. Dr. Harris shook his head. Medical records are confidential. I've already said more than I should. That's my brother in there, Emma hissed, pointing toward the clinic. If someone tried to kill him and his team, I deserve to know. Before Dr. Harris could respond, a shout from inside the clinic sent them both running. They found Mrs. Reed standing in the doorway of Jason's room, her face pale with shock. He's gone, she whispered. The room was empty, the bedsheets rumpled, and the window open to the night air. A hastily scrawled note lay on the pillow. Need to think, don't follow. How could he just leave? Emma demanded. He can barely walk. You'd be surprised what determination can accomplish, Dr. Harris replied grimly. We need to find him before he hurts himself, or worse, someone discovers him. Within an hour, half the village was searching for Thomas, or Jason, as Emma insisted on calling him. Flashlights bobbed like fireflies through the darkened forest paths surrounding Pinewood. Morgan organized the search parties, sending groups in different directions while maintaining radio contact. Don't worry, he assured Emma as they trudged through the underbrush. He knows these woods. He often disappears for hours, just walking or sitting by the creek. But he's never been this upset before, Emma countered, scanning the shadows frantically. What if his memories are overwhelming him? Dr. Harris says he might be experiencing two sets of life experiences colliding. Morgan's face betrayed his concern despite his reassuring tone. Thomas is stronger than he looks. 5 years of mountain living builds resilience. They searched until dawn, broke over the eastern ridges, painting the forest in hues of gold and amber. The search parties reconvened in the village square, everyone exhausted and increasingly worried. No sign of Jason had been found. We should check the cabin again, Mrs. Reed suggested, her voice hoarse from calling his name throughout the night. He might have returned home. The cabin stood silent in the morning light, no smoke rising from the chimney. Emma's heart sank as they approached the door, finding it still locked. Mrs. Reed fished a key from her pocket with trembling hands. Thomas, she called as the door swung open. The interior revealed nothing unusual, the same sparse furniture, neat and undisturbed. But as Emma stepped further inside, she noticed something on the table. Jason's sketchbook lay open to a new drawing. It depicted a rocky outcropping overlooking a steep valley, rendered with the same precise detail as his other sketches. I know this place, Mrs. Reed whispered, touching the page lightly. It's Falcon's Point. He goes there sometimes when he needs solitude. How far? Emma demanded, already heading for the door. 3 miles north up the ridge trail, but it's dangerous. The path is narrow, and after last night's frost... Emma was already running, Morgan close behind her. They moved quickly through the forest, following a trail that grew progressively steeper and more treacherous. The path narrowed until they were sidling along a rocky ledge, the ground falling away sharply to their right. Slow down, Morgan cautioned. One misstep here could be fatal. Emma forced herself to reduce her pace, though every fiber of her being screamed to hurry. Finally, the trail opened onto a rocky promontory jutting out over the valley below. And there, seated at its edge with his back to them, was Jason. Thank God, Emma breathed, relief flooding through her. Morgan caught her arm before she could rush forward. Careful, let's not startle him. They approached slowly, making enough noise that Jason would hear them coming. He didn't turn, his gaze fixed on the vast panorama of mountains spreading before him like frozen waves. "Jason?" Emma called softly when they were a few yards away. He turned then, his scarred face impassive. In his hands was a small metal object that Emma recognized with a jolt, a Riverside Eagles keychain, tarnished and bent. "I found this," he said, his voice a painful rasp. "Under a rock here. I put it here 5 years ago." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "You remember coming here?" Jason nodded slowly. "After the crash, walking, bleeding. I remember stopping here thinking I would die." Emma knelt beside him, ignoring Morgan's wary presence behind her. "Jason, Dr. Harris told me something last night about your injuries. He thinks the bus crash might not have been an accident." Jason's good eye closed briefly. When it opened again, there was a haunting clarity there. "It wasn't," he confirmed. "Someone ran us off the road." The confession hung in the crisp mountain air. Morgan shifted uncomfortably behind them. "I should give you two some privacy," he muttered, backing away. "Stay," Jason said suddenly, turning to fix Morgan with an intense stare. "You know more than you've said. The village knows more." Morgan froze, his weathered face a mask of conflicting emotions. After a long moment, he sighed heavily and sank down onto a nearby rock. "When we found you," he began reluctantly, "there were things that didn't add up. The burns weren't all from fire. Some looked like they came from something else. And there was a knife wound in your side that had nothing to do with the crash." Emma gasped, but Jason merely nodded as if confirming something he already knew. "We reported it to the sheriff," Morgan continued, "but they seemed uninterested. Said it was probably debris from the crash. When we pressed the issue, suddenly there was pressure. Subtle threats about tax audits, building code violations, things that could shut down half the businesses in Pinewood." "So you just stopped asking questions?" Emma demanded, anger flaring. "We protected Thomas," Morgan replied defensively. "He was safe here, anonymous. If whoever ran that bus off the road knew he'd survived." Emma turned back to Jason, who was staring at the keychain in his palm. "Can you remember who did it? Did you see the other vehicle?" Jason's brow furrowed with concentration. "Black SUV, no plates. It came up behind the bus, then alongside. The driver, our driver, he shouted something. Then we were hitting the guardrail, going over." "Then what?" Emma pressed gently. "Fire, screaming." His hand went unconsciously to the scars on his face. "I was thrown out before the bus rolled all the way down. I tried to go back to help, but there was an explosion." He trailed off, his breathing becoming labored. Emma placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremors running through his body. "That's enough for now," she said, softly. "Let's get you back to the clinic." Jason shook his head firmly. "I'm not going back there. I'll stay at the cabin." Morgan looked like he wanted to object, but thought better of it. "Mrs. Reed will be relieved," he said instead. "She's been worried sick." The walk back was slow, Jason moving stiffly but with determined independence. By the time they reached the village, word had spread that he'd been found. Mrs. Reed was waiting at the cabin, her relief palpable as she embraced him. "Never do that again," she scolded, though there was no real anger in her voice. Later that evening, after Jason had rested and eaten, Emma sat with him on the cabin's porch. The village was quiet, most residents retreating indoors as darkness fell. "There's something I need to do," Jason said abruptly. "Tomorrow. I need to show you where it happened." Emma studied his profile, struck by how the scarring seemed less prominent in the fading light. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "No," he admitted. "But I need to face it. And there might be evidence still there, something to explain why someone would want to kill a bus full of high school football players." Emma nodded slowly. "Okay, but we should tell Dr. Harris. Maybe get some sedatives just in case. And Morgan," Jason added. "He knows these mountains better than anyone." They sat in companionable silence as stars began to appear overhead. For the first time since she'd arrived in Pinewood, Emma felt they were making real progress. Jason was remembering, confronting his past rather than hiding from it. Her phone buzzed, a rare moment of service. A text from her parents. "Please call, we're worried." Emma sighed. "I should update our parents. They think I've gone completely off the deep end this time." Jason tensed visibly at the mention of their parents. "What will you tell them?" "The truth, that I found you." "Don't," he said sharply. "Not yet. Whoever tried to kill us, they might be watching them, monitoring their calls." Emma stared at him, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. "You really think so? Someone powerful enough to suppress an investigation into a bus full of dead teenagers?" Jason's voice was bitter. "Yes, I think they're still watching. And now that I'm remembering, we might both be in danger." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Emma woke early, having spent the night on Mrs. Reed's sofa. She found Jason already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with maps spread before him. "I've marked where I think it happened," he explained, pointing to a spot on the tattered topographical map. "It's remote, at least 3 hours hiking." Morgan arrived as they were preparing supplies, his expression grim when Jason explained their plan. "That area's treacherous," he warned. "And if what you're saying about the crash is true, we should be bringing law enforcement." "Not yet," Jason insisted. "Not until we know more." Dr. Harris reluctantly provided a small medical kit and some mild sedatives, just in case. By mid-morning, their small expedition was ready to depart. Jason, Emma, Morgan, and, surprisingly, Mrs. Reed, who flatly refused to be left behind. "That boy hasn't been out of my sight for more than a day in 5 years, she declared firmly. "I'm not starting now." The hike was challenging, especially for Jason, who moved slowly, but with stubborn determination. They followed game trails where possible, bushwhacking through dense underbrush when necessary. By early afternoon, Jason began to show signs of recognition. "We're close," he murmured, pausing to survey the landscape. "The road should be just above us." They emerged onto an abandoned stretch of mountain highway, its surface cracked and overgrown after years of disuse. Jason stood in the center of the road, turning slowly, his face a mask of concentration. "Here," he finally said, pointing to a section where the guardrail was missing. "This is where we went over." The four stood at the edge, looking down at the steep ravine below. From this height, nothing was visible except dense forest. "The bus would be at the bottom if it's still there," Morgan observed. "That's a hell of a climb down." "Then we'd better get started," Emma replied, already searching for a path downward. As Morgan began securing ropes for their descent, Emma noticed a black SUV appearing around the distant bend in the road. It slowed as it approached, and despite the afternoon sun, she could see that its windows were tinted completely black, making it impossible to identify the driver. Emma's body tensed as the black SUV slowed to a crawl on the abandoned stretch of road. Her hand instinctively reached for Jason's arm, pulling him back from the guardrail's edge. "Get down!" she whispered urgently, tugging him toward the cover of nearby trees. Morgan and Mrs. Reed followed quickly, ducking behind the dense foliage as the vehicle came to a complete stop, precisely where they had been standing moments before. Through gaps in the leaves, Emma watched as the driver's door opened. A tall man in a dark jacket stepped out, surveying the area with methodical precision. "Who is that?" Mrs. Reed whispered, her fingers digging anxiously into Morgan's sleeve. Morgan shook his head silently, eyes narrowed as he observed the stranger. The man walked to the broken guardrail, peering down into the ravine, before pulling out what appeared to be a camera with a telephoto lens. He began taking photographs of the area, paying particular attention to the point where the bus had plunged over the edge. Jason's breathing grew ragged beside Emma. His good eye was wide with something between recognition and terror. "Black SUV," he whispered hoarsely, "like the one that night." Emma squeezed his hand reassuringly, though her own heart hammered against her ribs. After what seemed like an eternity, the man returned to his vehicle and drove away, the SUV disappearing around the mountain bend. "We should go back," Mrs. Reed said immediately. "If whoever caused the accident is still monitoring this area after 5 years." "No." Jason's voice was stronger than Emma had yet heard it. "I need to see, to know." Morgan reluctantly resumed securing the ropes for their descent. The climb down was arduous, with loose rocks and thick underbrush complicating their progress. Jason moved with surprising agility despite his injuries, muscle memory from years of athletic training still evident beneath his physical limitations. Near the bottom of the ravine, the forest grew denser, sunlight filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns. Jason paused frequently, scanning the surroundings with increasing tension. "Should be around here," he murmured, pushing through a thicket of young pines. The bus rolled several times before... He stopped abruptly, and Emma nearly collided with him. Following his gaze, she saw what had halted him. A piece of twisted metal protruding from the undergrowth, painted in the unmistakable green and yellow of the riverside eagles. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. The wreckage was more extensive than she had expected, scattered across a wide area and partially buried by 5 years of forest growth. Nature had reclaimed much of the scene, rust-colored metal peeking through blankets of moss, saplings growing through shattered windows, vines weaving through the remnants of what had once been seats. Jason approached the largest section of the bus slowly, as if in a trance. His hand reached out to touch the corroded metal, fingers tracing what remained of the school's emblem. "They're still here," he said quietly, his voice hollow. "My teammates. We need to tell their families." Morgan was already on his satellite phone, stepping away to make a call. Mrs. Reed stood beside Emma, both women watching Jason with identical expressions of concern as he moved methodically through the wreckage. "I was sitting here," he said, pointing to a particularly mangled section, "next to Cooper. We were all celebrating, singing the school anthem. Then there was this jolt, like something hit us." His voice grew more animated as the memories crystallized. "The driver shouted. We were too loud at first to understand. Then everyone was screaming." Emma moved closer, careful not to disturb anything that might be important evidence. "Do you remember seeing the other vehicle, the black SUV?" Jason closed his eye, concentrating. "It pulled alongside us. The bus swerved. I think our driver was trying to avoid a collision. Then we hit the guardrail and..." His voice broke. "I remember feeling weightless, then pain." Morgan returned, his expression grim. "I've contacted the county sheriff. They're sending a team, but it'll take hours to reach this location." As they waited, Jason continued to remember details, each recollection seemingly triggering more. He described how he had been thrown clear during the initial roll, landing in a thicket that broke his fall but caused severe lacerations. How he had tried to climb back down to the burning wreckage to help his friends, only to be caught in a secondary explosion that caused his facial burns. How he had wandered, delirious with pain and blood loss, for what might have been days before his memories dissolved into the fog of trauma. By the time the authorities arrived, a grim-faced sheriff and 3 deputies who rappelled down with professional efficiency, Jason had reconstructed much of what had happened that night. The sheriff, a weathered man named Collins, listened to Jason's account with increasing alarm. "This doesn't match the official report," he admitted, after taking detailed notes. "The investigation concluded it was driver error combined with bad weather conditions." "It was sabotage," Jason insisted, his voice stronger now despite its damaged rasp. "Someone wanted that bus to go over the edge." The sheriff's team began documenting the scene, photographing the wreckage and collecting what evidence remained after 5 years of exposure to the elements. As they worked, Sheriff Collins pulled Emma aside. "You understand this changes everything," he said in a low voice. If what your brother is saying is true, we're looking at multiple homicides, not an accident. Emma nodded, watching Jason as he stood with Mrs. Reed, her arm protectively around his shoulders. My brother survived for a reason, she said. To tell the truth about what happened here. As evening approached, bringing with it the rapid mountain chill, the sheriff arranged for a helicopter evacuation. The narrow ravine made it impossible to extract the victim's remains before dark, but he promised a full recovery operation would begin at first light. The helicopter ride back to civilization was largely silent, each passenger lost in their own thoughts. Jason stared out the window as they rose above the trees, his face a stone mask, as the sight of his teammates' deaths receded below them. When they landed at the county airport, a crowd had already gathered, local law enforcement, medical personnel, and most alarmingly to Emma, news vans with satellite equipment. How did they find out so quickly? She asked the sheriff. Police radio isn't secure, he replied grimly, and the discovery of missing teenagers after 5 years is big news, especially with potential foul play involved. Jason immediately tensed at the sight of cameras and microphones. Mrs. Reed stepped in front of him protectively as reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Emma found herself pushed aside in the chaos until Morgan grabbed her arm, pulling her back to Jason's side. We need to get him somewhere quiet, Morgan shouted over the commotion. This is too much. Sheriff Collins intervened, creating a path through the reporters. These people have been through enough today, he announced firmly. There will be a formal statement tomorrow. Until then, show some respect and back off. They managed to reach a sheriff's department SUV, climbing inside as deputies held back the press. Jason was visibly shaking, his breathing rapid and shallow. It's okay, Emma soothed, taking his hand. We're going somewhere safe. The sheriff drove them to a small motel on the outskirts of the county seat, arranging for rooms and posting deputies at the entrance to keep reporters at bay. Dr. Harris arrived an hour later, having been contacted by Mrs. Reed on their way back. He's in shock, the doctor confirmed, after examining Jason. The emotional strain of revisiting the accident site, combined with the sudden public exposure, it's overwhelming his system. Emma sat beside her brother as Dr. Harris administered a mild sedative. What happens now? She asked softly. I need to call our parents, Jason whispered, surprising her. But not from here. Not from any phone that could be traced. His paranoia concerned Emma, but after what they'd learned today, she couldn't dismiss it. Tomorrow, she promised. We'll find a secure way to contact them. That night, Emma lay awake in the motel room she shared with Mrs. Reed, listening to the occasional shouts of persistent reporters outside and the steady breathing of the elderly woman in the neighboring bed. In the connecting room, Jason was finally sleeping under the watchful eye of Morgan, who had refused to leave his side. Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming text, her parents again, increasingly frantic in their attempts to contact her. She stared at the screen, torn between her desire to reassure them and Jason's warning about possible surveillance. After a moment's hesitation, she typed a brief message. I'm safe. Found something important. We'll call when secure. Trust me. She was about to set the phone aside when it buzzed again. Not her parents this time, but an unknown number. The message contained just 5 words that made her blood run cold. Stop digging or lose everything. As Emma stared at the threatening text, a car door slammed outside the motel. Crossing to the window, she carefully peered through the blinds to see a black SUV idling in the parking lot, its windows tinted completely black. Emma's fingers tightened around her phone as the black SUV lingered in the motel parking lot. Her heart hammered against her ribs while she weighed her options. Should she wake the others? Call the sheriff? As she reached for her jacket, the vehicle's headlights flared to life, and it pulled slowly out of the lot, disappearing into the night. Sleep came fitfully after that, her dreams populated by burning buses and faceless men in dark vehicles. She woke at dawn to find Jason already up, sitting by the window with a notepad balanced on his knee, sketching the mountain landscape from memory. "I barely slept," he admitted when he noticed her watching. "I keep seeing their faces. My teammates. They deserve justice." Emma crossed the room, careful not to wake Mrs. Reed, who was still sleeping. "We'll find out who did this," she promised. "But that text I received last night, whoever's behind this knows we're getting close." Morgan entered the room quietly, bringing coffee and paper cups from the motel's small breakfast area. His weathered face was grave. "The sheriff called. They're starting recovery operations at the crash site this morning. He wants us to stay put until he gets here." Jason shook his head firmly. "I need to be there. My teammates deserve better than lying forgotten in that ravine for 5 years." "You don't have to see that," Emma protested, imagining the horror of the recovery process. "Yes, I do," Jason replied, his voice steady despite its rasping quality. "I survived. I owe them this much." By mid-morning, Sheriff Collins arrived to escort them back to the crash site. The media presence had multiplied overnight, vans and reporters crowding the motel entrance. Jason kept his head down, a baseball cap pulled low over his scarred face as they pushed through the gauntlet of shouted questions and flashing cameras. Mrs. Reed walked protectively at his side, her expression daring anyone to come too close. "National news picked up the story," the sheriff explained as they drove away from the chaos. "A high school football team disappears after winning state championship. Lone survivor found 5 years later with claims of foul play. It's the kind of story that captures attention." "And might flush out whoever's responsible," Emma suggested. The sheriff's expression was non-committal. "Maybe, or it might send them deeper into hiding." The recovery operation was already underway when they arrived at the ravine. A team of forensic specialists and search and rescue personnel had established a command post at the guardrail, with ropes and mechanical winches set up for the grim task of bringing up human remains. Jason stood at the edge, watching silently as the first body bags were carefully raised from below. 13 boys and their coach," he murmured. "They had futures, families, all gone because—" His voice trailed off, frustration evident in his tense posture. "Because of what?" Emma prompted gently. Jason shook his head. "I still can't remember why someone would target us. We were just a high school football team." A forensic technician approached, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Thompson, we may need your help identifying some personal effects found with the remains. Jewelry, phones, anything that might help with positive identifications." The process was painful but necessary. Jason's memory proved remarkably detailed as he identified items belonging to his teammates: a distinctive belt buckle, a custom phone case, the coach's championship ring from his own playing days. Each identification seemed to simultaneously drain him and strengthen his resolve. By late afternoon, all 14 bodies had been recovered and transported to the county morgue for formal identification and autopsies. Sheriff Collins gathered the small group by his vehicle away from the ears of the recovery team. "The forensic pathologist did a preliminary examination at the scene," he said in a low voice. "She found something interesting. Several of the victims show evidence of injuries inconsistent with the crash." "What kind of injuries?" Emma asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Knife wounds," the sheriff replied grimly. "Precise, ante-mortem cuts that suggest they were attacked before the crash or immediately after, by someone who came down to ensure there were no survivors." Jason's face drained of color. His hand instinctively moved to his side where his own knife wound had healed into a jagged scar. "I remember now," he whispered. "Someone came down after the crash. I was thrown clear trying to get back to help. A man in black with a mask. I thought he was there to rescue us until I saw the knife." As the implications of Jason's memory sank in, Emma's phone rang, her parents' number flashing on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, she answered, putting it on speaker. "Emma, thank God." Her mother's voice was strained with worry. "We've been seeing the news reports. They're saying they found the Riverside bus and that Jason might be alive. Is it true?" Emma looked at her brother, who nodded slightly. "Yes, Mom, it's true. Jason is with me right now." The sound that came through the phone was something between a sob and a gasp. "Let me talk to him. Please, I need to hear his voice." Jason hesitated, then took the phone. "Mom," he said simply, his damaged voice barely above a whisper. "It's me." The conversation that followed was emotional and fragmented, with Jason struggling to explain his condition and their parents alternating between disbelief, joy, and horror at what he had endured. Emma watched her brother's face transform as he spoke, moments of the old Jason shining through the scarred exterior of Thomas. When the call ended, Jason seemed both exhausted and energized. "They're catching the first flight out," he explained, returning Emma's phone. "Dad's already contacted his lawyer about reopening the investigation." Sheriff Collins nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll need all the pressure we can get. An investigation this big that was closed improperly. There will be resistance from multiple directions." Back in Pinewood that evening, word of their discovery had transformed the small village. Residents gathered in the town's modest diner, watching news reports on the ancient television mounted above the counter. Jason's identity was still being protected in the media, referred to only as a survivor with significant injuries. But Emma noticed the protective glances villagers cast their way as they entered. The atmosphere in Pinewood had shifted from suspicion to solidarity. These people had sheltered and protected Thomas for 5 years. Now they closed ranks around Jason with the same fierce devotion. Morgan organized a rotating watch of volunteers to keep reporters and other unwanted visitors away from Mrs. Reed's cabin. Dr. Harris arrived as they were settling in, carrying an evidence bag that he placed carefully on the table. "I thought you should see this before I turn it over to the sheriff," he explained. "It was among Jason's, personal effects when he was first brought to me." Inside the bag was a tarnished metal object, a state championship medal, partially melted from the heat of the fire, but still recognizable. Engraved on the back was a simple message: "Riverside Eagles, champions forever." Jason held the bag, staring at the medal with a strange mix of grief and determination. "I remember now," he said quietly. "Coach gave these to each of us on the bus, right after the game. We were supposed to keep them secret until the formal ceremony at school the following Monday." "Which means no one outside the bus should have known about them," Emma concluded. "Yet you were found with yours. And the others would have had theirs too," Jason continued, his good eye widening with realization. "If the sheriff examines the remains, they'll have physical evidence connecting each victim to the bus," Dr. Harris finished, "and possibly evidence of whoever attacked you after the crash." As the implications sank in, Morgan burst through the door, his usually calm demeanor shattered. "Turn on the news," he said urgently. "Now." The small television in Mrs. Reed's living room flickered to life, showing aerial footage of the crash site. But it wasn't the recovery operation that drew their gasps. It was what appeared to be happening at that very moment. The entire area was ablaze, flames consuming the forest and what remained of the bus wreckage. The news anchor's voice was grave as she reported that an unexplained fire had erupted at the site where human remains had been recovered earlier that day. "They're destroying the evidence," Emma whispered, horror dawning as she realized the extent of the conspiracy they were facing. Jason stood abruptly, his scarred face hardening with resolve. "But they're too late," he said, holding up the championship medal. "We already have proof, and I intend to make sure whoever did this pays for every life they took." The cabin fell silent as Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She checked it with trepidation, expecting another threat. Instead, she found a single line from an unknown number. Footage exists of the black SUV that ran the bus off the road. Meet alone at Pinewood Diner, midnight. Emma stared at the message on her phone, reading it for the third time as possibilities raced through her mind. A potential witness with actual footage of the black SUV. It seemed too convenient, especially after the fire at the crash site. The timing raised every red flag, yet they couldn't afford to ignore such crucial evidence. "What is it?" Jason asked, noticing her expression. Emma hesitated before showing him the message. "It could be a trap." Jason studied the text, his scarred face unreadable. "Or it could be someone who's been afraid to come forward until now." "Either way, you're not going alone," Morgan declared, reading over Emma's shoulder. His tone left no room for argument. Sheriff Collins arrived at the cabin an hour later, visibly exhausted from coordinating the recovery effort and now dealing with the suspicious fire. His weathered face grew grave as Emma showed him the message. "Classic setup," he muttered, "but we can't ignore it. I'll have plainclothes deputies at the diner before midnight." By morning, headlines about the Riverside miracle dominated every news channel and newspaper. A montage of reports flashed across Mrs. Reed's small television as the group gathered around it. Breaking news from Oregon, where the mystery of the missing Riverside Eagles has finally been solved after 5 years. Sources confirm one survivor was found living under an assumed identity in a remote mountain village. Questions arise about the original investigation, as evidence suggests the crash may have been deliberately caused. Jason watched the coverage with increasing discomfort, particularly when grainy footage of him being escorted by the sheriff appeared. His cap pulled low and face turned away from cameras. "They don't know who you are yet," Emma reassured him. "Sheriff Collins hasn't released your identity." "It's only a matter of time," Jason replied, his damaged voice barely audible. "Someone will recognize me, even with the scars." Mrs. Reed switched off the television with a decisive click. "You need to eat," she declared practically. "Can't face whatever's coming on an empty stomach." As they sat for breakfast, a black sedan with government plates pulled up outside. 2 serious-looking men in suits emerged, approaching the cabin with purposeful strides. "FBI," Sheriff Collins identified them through the window, having arrived moments earlier to discuss security for the midnight meeting. "I called them in last night. This case just got too big for a county sheriff's department." The agents introduced themselves as Special Agents Warner and Michaels from the FBI's Criminal Investigation Division. They listened intently as Jason recounted his fragmented memories of the crash and the aftermath, taking detailed notes. "The Bureau will take over the formal investigation," Agent Warner explained, "but we'll need Mr. Thompson to make an official statement and submit to a full medical examination to document his injuries." Jason tensed visibly. "I'm not going to be put on display." "Your privacy will be protected as much as possible," Agent Michaels assured him. "But your testimony is crucial evidence in what's now a federal murder investigation." As the agents outlined the next steps, Emma's phone rang, her parents calling from the airport in Portland. "We just landed," her father said, his voice tight with emotion. "The rental car is ready. We should reach Pinewood in about 3 hours." Emma glanced at Jason, who had gone pale at the mention of their parents' imminent arrival. 5 years of separation, 5 years of change and trauma on both sides. Their reunion would be complicated at best. "He's nervous," Emma told her parents. "He's not the same person you remember." "None of us are," her father replied softly. By midday, news vans had established a perimeter around Pinewood, kept at bay by local residents who formed human barriers at major entry points. The village that had once seemed so suspicious of Emma, now united to protect Jason. Emma went with Jason to revisit the crash site, now cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape. The fire had consumed much of the remaining evidence, but FBI technicians worked methodically through the charred debris. "My teammates deserved better than this," Jason said, watching from beyond the tape. Agent Warner approached them, holding a small evidence bag. "We found this buried under a rock, away from the main wreckage. The fire didn't reach it." Inside was a partially melted smartphone in a distinctive case with the Riverside Eagles logo. "That's Cooper's phone," Jason identified immediately. "He sat next to me on the bus." "The memory card might still be intact," Warner said. "If we're lucky, there could be photos or videos from right before the crash." Back in Pinewood, preparations for the midnight meeting intensified. The FBI established surveillance around the diner, while Emma and Sheriff Collins planned how to approach the mysterious informant. "I'll go in first," Emma insisted. "If it's a trap, they're expecting me alone anyway." "With a wire and a panic button," the sheriff countered firmly, "and we'll have agents covering every exit." As evening approached, the moment Jason had been both anticipating and dreading arrived. A rental car pulled up to the cabin, and Emma watched her brother's face as their parents emerged. Her mother stopped mid-step when she caught sight of Jason standing in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth in shock, despite having been warned about his appearance. Their father, always the steadier of the two, moved forward first, tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks. "Son," was all he could manage before enveloping Jason in a careful embrace. The reunion was raw and awkward, filled with tears and hesitant touches as Jason's parents confronted the reality of his transformation. His mother kept reaching to touch his face, his scars, his hands, as if confirming he was truly real. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. 5 years of imagining this moment, and now I don't have the words." "You don't need words," Jason replied, his damaged voice causing fresh tears in his mother's eyes. Emma watched from the periphery, giving them space while observing the complex emotions playing across her brother's face. Recognition, discomfort, relief, and something like guilt. Later that evening, their father pulled Emma aside. "I've brought our family lawyer. He's already filing motions to reopen the investigation into the crash and reviewing the settlement the school district forced on us." Emma blinked in surprise. "Settlement? You never mentioned a settlement." Her father's expression darkened. "The school's insurance company pushed it through while we were still in shock, made us sign non-disclosure agreements as a condition. I didn't fight hard enough then, but I'm fighting now." As the time for the midnight meeting approached, tension built in the cabin. Jason had agreed to stay behind with their parents and Mrs. Reed, protected by Morgan and several FBI agents, while Emma prepared to meet the mysterious informant. "Be careful," Jason told her, as Agent Warner fitted her with a wire. "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, get out immediately." The Pinewood Diner was eerily quiet at 11:45 p.m., its usual warm glow diminished by darkened windows. The owner, a taciturn man who had known Thomas for years, had agreed to leave the back door unlocked before clearing out, giving the FBI time to secure the building. Emma sat alone at a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee as the clock ticked toward midnight. Sheriff Collins and Agent Michaels were disguised as late-night customers, while other agents monitored from vehicles outside. At exactly midnight, the bell above the door jingled. A man in a delivery uniform entered, cap pulled low over his face. He scanned the nearly empty diner before sliding into Emma's booth. "You came alone. Good," he said quietly, keeping his head down. "I did as instructed," Emma replied, studying him carefully. "You said you have footage of the black SUV?" The man glanced nervously around before sliding a small USB drive across the table. "I was working a late delivery shift that night. My dashcam caught the whole thing. The SUV forcing the bus off the road. I tried to report it at the time, but the deputy I spoke to said it was just a weather-related accident. When I persisted, I started getting threats." "Why come forward now?" Emma asked, not touching the drive yet. Because I saw the news about finding a survivor, and because whoever was behind this tried to burn the evidence. He finally looked up, revealing a face lined with stress. I've been living in fear for 5 years. I want it to end. As Emma reached for the drive, the man suddenly tensed, his eyes fixed on something beyond her shoulder. Before she could turn, the diner's front window shattered under a hail of gunfire. The man jerked violently as bullets tore through him, blood spattering across the table. "Down!" Sheriff Collins shouted, drawing his weapon as he dove for cover. Emma scrambled underneath the table, grabbing the USB drive and clutching it tightly as chaos erupted around her. Through the broken window, she glimpsed a black SUV speeding away, its windows tinted completely black. Emma felt the explosion of glass around her as the bullets tore through the diner, the wet warmth of the informant's blood spattering across her face and hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched the USB drive, her only thought to protect this precious evidence that had just cost a man his life. "Stay down," Agent Michael shouted, returning fire through the shattered window. Sheriff Collins crawled toward her, shielding her body with his own as they inched away from the booth where the informant lay motionless, his eyes fixed in a permanent expression of surprise. The sound of screeching tires and revving engines filled the night as the black SUV fled the scene. "Are you hit?" Sheriff Collins asked urgently, his hands quickly checking Emma for injuries. "I'm okay," she managed, though her whole body trembled violently. "But he—" She gestured helplessly toward the informant. "Nothing we can do for him now," Collins said grimly. "We need to get you out of here. They might come back." FBI agents swarmed the diner, securing the perimeter, while Emma was rushed to a waiting vehicle. The drive back to Mrs. Reed's cabin was a blur, her mind replaying the moment when the informant's expression shifted from nervousness to shock as the bullets found him. When they arrived at the cabin, Jason was waiting anxiously on the porch, having heard about the shooting through the FBI's radio communications. He rushed to Emma's side as she emerged from the vehicle, his scarred face twisted with concern. "You're covered in blood," he whispered hoarsely. "It's not mine," Emma replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite the horror she'd just witnessed. She held up the USB drive. "He gave this to me before they killed him." Inside, their parents were pale with shock, their mother rushing to embrace Emma with trembling arms. Mrs. Reed silently brought a washcloth and basin of warm water, helping Emma clean the blood from her face and hands with the practiced efficiency of a nurse. The FBI agents gathered around the small kitchen table, connecting the USB drive to a secure laptop. "It could be rigged to release a virus or corrupt our systems," Agent Warner cautioned, implementing several security protocols before accessing the contents. The footage that appeared was grainy but unmistakable, a mountain road at night, heavy rain visible in the dashcam's limited view. A bus with Riverside Eagles emblazoned on its side appeared, moving carefully around a bend. Then, entering the frame from behind the dashcam vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows accelerated aggressively, overtaking the delivery truck and pulling alongside the bus. The footage showed the SUV deliberately swerving into the bus's lane, forcing it toward the guardrail. The camera captured the moment of impact, the bus breaking through the barrier, the beginning of its fatal plunge. "There's more," Agent Michael said, advancing to another video file. This second clip showed the aftermath. The delivery driver had stopped and was making his way down the slope toward the crash. The black SUV had also stopped, and a figure in dark clothing emerged, descending rapidly toward the wreckage. The driver, wisely keeping his distance, captured grainy footage of the figure systematically moving through the crash site, appearing to check each victim. The video ended abruptly, presumably when the driver realized the danger he was witnessing. Silence filled the cabin as the implications of what they'd just seen sank in. The footage confirmed Jason's fragmented memories. The crash was deliberate, and someone had come afterward to ensure there were no survivors. "Can you enhance the license plate?" Sheriff Collins asked. Agent Warner shook his head. "Too blurry, and it appears to be partially obscured intentionally. But the vehicle model and some distinguishing features should be enough to start tracking it down." Jason had gone completely still during the viewing, his good eye fixed on the screen with an intensity that seemed to physically drain him. "I remember him now," he said softly. "The man who came down after the crash. He wore a mask, but there was something familiar about him." "Familiar how?" Emma asked. "I don't know yet," Jason replied, frustration evident in his voice. "It's like the memory is there, just beyond reach." The shooting at the diner made national headlines by morning, the media frenzy around Pinewood intensifying to a fever pitch. News helicopters circled overhead, and the number of reporters attempting to breach the village's improvised security perimeter had tripled overnight. Emma's parents, having witnessed the violence now targeting their children, insisted on immediate protective measures. Their father, leveraging his business connections, arranged for private security to supplement the FBI presence around the cabin. "We should take Jason back home with us," their mother argued during a tense family discussion. "He needs proper medical care, psychological treatment." "I'm not going anywhere," Jason interrupted, firmly. "Whoever did this thinks they've gotten away with murdering my entire team for 5 years. I won't hide now." "But you're in danger," their mother pleaded. "I've been in danger since the night of the crash," Jason replied, his damaged voice stronger than Emma had yet heard it. "I just didn't know it." The FBI had made progress overnight, analyzing the USB footage and coordinating with state police to identify the vehicle. Agent Warner briefed the family over breakfast, spreading photographs across Mrs. Reed's kitchen table. "We believe the SUV belongs to this man," he said, pointing to a picture of a well-dressed, middle-aged man with steel-gray hair. "Vincent Hargrove, former booster for the Westridge Wolves, Riverside's rivals in that championship game." "Hargrove," Jason repeated, the name clearly triggering something. "He was at the game. I remember him arguing with Coach Stevens before the match." "About what?" Emma asked. Jason shook his head, frustration evident. "I can't recall. Something heated." "Hargrove had significant gambling debts at the time," Agent Michaels added. "We've uncovered evidence of large bets placed against Riverside in that championship game. Bets that would have paid off handsomely if Riverside had lost." "But we won," Jason said softly. "And hours later, the team bus went off a cliff," Sheriff Collins concluded grimly. Later that afternoon, Emma noticed Jason had disappeared from the cabin. Panicked, she searched the small house before finding him sitting alone on the back porch, staring at the mountains. "You scared me," she said, settling beside him. "I thought that I'd run off again." Jason finished with a hint of a smile. "No, I just needed some air. The walls were closing in." Emma studied her brother's profile, the familiar shape of his nose and jaw still visible, despite the scars. "They're running background checks on everyone involved with both teams. If Hargrove is behind this, they'll find proof." "It's bigger than just Hargrove," Jason said quietly. "Someone helped cover this up for 5 years. Someone with enough influence to bury an investigation into a bus full of dead teenagers." The sound of tires on gravel interrupted their conversation. Emma tensed, half expecting another black SUV, but instead saw a familiar county sheriff's department vehicle approaching. Sheriff Collins stepped out, his expression uncharacteristically agitated. "We have a problem," he announced as Emma and Jason met him at the front of the cabin. "Someone leaked your identity to the press. Your full name and photo, before the accident, are all over the news now." Jason absorbed this with remarkable calm. Was it going to stay secret forever? "We wanted to control the narrative," Sheriff Collins replied. "Now Hargrove knows exactly who survived, and there's more. He's disappeared." FBI went to question him this morning, and he was gone. Private jet took off from his airfield before dawn. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He's running. Or coming for us, Jason added softly. Their parents and Mrs. Reed joined them outside, alerted by the sheriff's arrival. As Collins explained the situation, Emma noticed a silver Lexus driving slowly past the cabin for the second time in 5 minutes. Her instincts, heightened after the diner shooting, immediately registered danger. "Sheriff," she said quietly, nodding toward the vehicle. Collins followed her gaze, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. Everyone inside, now. They had barely reached the door when the silver Lexus accelerated suddenly, swerving toward the cabin. The window lowered, and Emma caught a glimpse of something metallic pointing their way. "Gun!" Sheriff Collins shouted, drawing his weapon and firing at the vehicle as everyone dove for cover. The front window of the cabin exploded inward as bullets tore through the glass. Emma felt Jason's weight on top of her, shielding her with his body as shards rained down around them. Their mother screamed somewhere to their right, and their father called out their names in panic. The Lexus sped away as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving behind a scene of shattered glass and splintered wood. As Emma and Jason cautiously raised their heads, they spotted a small object that had been thrown through the window, a cheap cell phone, landing intact among the debris. Sheriff Collins approached it cautiously, using a pen to press the speakerphone button when it began to ring. "You can't hide forever, Thompson," a distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "You should have died with the others." When Emma returned to the motel room with the evidence found, she discovered that Jason had disappeared, leaving only a note. "I know who is responsible. I need to do this alone. I know who is responsible. I need to do this alone." Emma read the hastily scribbled note again, her hands trembling as she crumpled it into her fist. The room seemed to tilt around her as panic surged through her body. Just when they were finally making progress, just when they had actual evidence that could bring justice for the Riverside Eagles, Jason was gone. "He couldn't have gotten far," Sheriff Collins said, already on his radio calling for roadblocks. "Mrs. Reed, any idea where he might go?" The elderly woman shook her head, her face ashen with worry. "When Jason, got like this, determined about something, he'd sometimes disappear into the mountains for hours. He knows every trail, every cave." Emma's father paced the small cabin, his businesslike composure finally cracking. "We just got him back. We can't lose him again." "He mentioned remembering something about Hargrove," Emma said, trying to piece together Jason's thinking. "Something about an argument with Coach Stevens before the championship game." Agent Warner was already pulling up files on his laptop. The background check on Coach Stevens shows he was investigating illegal gambling, connected to high school sports right before his death. He had compiled a file, but never turned it over to authorities. Jason must have remembered something crucial, Emma concluded. Something that made him feel he had to confront Hargrove alone. The realization hit her suddenly. "The ex-Trenador," she whispered, remembering Jason's mumbling during one of his episodes. "Not Hargrove. He was talking about Westridge's ex-coach, the team they beat in the championship." Sheriff Collins was already pulling up records. Martin Keller, former head coach of the Westridge Wolves, resigned under mysterious circumstances right after the championship. "Where is he now?" Emma demanded. "Tax records show a property registered to him in the mountains, about 20 miles from here," Agent Michaels reported after a quick search. "Remote cabin, limited access road." Emma grabbed her jacket. "That's where Jason's gone." He remembered Keller was connected to this somehow. Within minutes, a search party was assembled. Emma, Sheriff Collins, Morgan, and a team of FBI agents. The mountains were already darkening as storm clouds gathered, bringing in eerie twilight hours before sunset. The forecast warned of severe thunderstorms moving in by evening. "If we don't find him before that hits, the roads will be impassable," Morgan cautioned as they loaded into vehicles. Emma's parents wanted to come, but Agent Warner convinced them to stay at the cabin with Mrs. Reed under FBI protection. "If this is a trap, we can't risk your entire family," he explained grimly. The drive to Keller's property was tense and largely silent. Emma stared out the window at the progressively more rugged terrain, wondering how Jason had managed to travel here in his condition. The determination that had driven him to survive 5 years ago was clearly still burning within him. "How would he even get there?" she asked Morgan, who was navigating the increasingly treacherous mountain roads. "There's an old logging road that connects near Mrs. Reed's property," Morgan explained. "If he took that, he could have hitched a ride with one of the seasonal workers heading down the mountain." Sheriff Collins's radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, we've got confirmation that Keller is at the cabin. Thermal imaging from our helicopter shows 2 heat signatures inside." Emma's heart clenched. "He's already there." The storm broke just as they reached the turnoff to Keller's property, a narrow dirt road cutting through dense forest. Rain hammered against the windshield, reducing visibility to mere feet. Lightning split the darkened sky, illuminating the way forward in brief, brilliant flashes. "We'll have to proceed on foot from here," Sheriff Collins announced as they reached a washed-out section of road. "The vehicles can't make it any further." Equipped with flashlights and rain gear, the search party advanced through the downpour. Emma felt mud sucking at her boots with every step, but she pushed forward, driven by the fear of what Jason might be facing alone. The cabin appeared through the curtain of rain, a modest structure of weathered logs with a single light visible through the curtained windows. The FBI team spread out, surrounding the building while Sheriff Collins attempted to establish communication. "Martin Keller," he called through a megaphone. "This is Sheriff Collins from Pinewood County. We know you have Jason Thompson inside. Come out with your hands visible." Silence answered him, broken only by the drumming of rain on leaves and the occasional rumble of thunder. The FBI agents exchanged glances, hands on their weapons as they prepared to breach the cabin. "Wait," Emma said suddenly, catching sight of movement at the window. "Someone's there." The cabin door creaked open slowly. A figure emerged onto the small porch, hands raised. Even through the rain, Emma could make out Jason's distinctive silhouette, his scarred face partially illuminated by the porch light. "It's okay," he called, his damaged voice barely audible above the storm. "I'm unharmed. Mr. Keller and I have been talking." Behind him appeared a second figure, an aging man with a lined face and thinning gray hair. Martin Keller looked nothing like the imposing coach Emma had imagined, but rather a defeated man, worn down by years of regret. The FBI agents maintained their positions as Sheriff Collins and Emma approached the porch. "Jason, are you really okay?" Emma asked, scanning her brother for any signs of duress. Jason nodded. "Mr. Keller isn't behind the crash. He's been hiding too. He's afraid of Hargrove." Inside the cabin, as the storm raged outside, Keller revealed a story that connected the final pieces. He had discovered that Hargrove, along with several wealthy Westridge boosters, had been fixing games and placing large bets on high school sports throughout the state. When Riverside unexpectedly won the championship, Hargrove lost millions. "Coach Stevens figured it out," Keller explained, his hands shaking as he clutched a mug of coffee. "He confronted me after the game, said he had evidence that would expose the whole operation. He was going to the authorities the next day. So Hargrove arranged the crash to silence him," Emma concluded. "And everyone else who might have heard something," Keller nodded grimly. "I quit coaching immediately, moved out here. When I heard about a survivor being found, I knew they'd come for me too." Jason sat quietly during this exchange, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "I remembered something Keller said to Coach Stevens before the game, about how betting against his own team would be something Vince would pull. I didn't understand what it meant then. "Why didn't you wait for us?" Emma asked, the fear she'd felt now transforming to anger. "You could have been killed." "Because I needed to know if my memory was accurate," Jason replied simply, "and because I was tired of being protected, of others risking their lives while I hid." Sheriff Collins was already coordinating with the FBI team, relaying Keller's information and arranging for his protection in exchange for testimony. The storm had intensified, making immediate evacuation impossible. They would have to wait it out. As midnight approached, Emma sat with Jason by the cabin's small fireplace, the others having spread out to maintain security or catch what rest they could. "I still don't understand why you came alone," Emma said softly. "After everything we've been through." Jason stared into the flames, the scarred side of his face illuminated by the flickering light. "For 5 years I've been Thomas, someone who needed protection, who couldn't remember, couldn't speak properly, couldn't face his past. I needed to prove to myself that Jason still exists somewhere inside me." Emma took his hand, feeling the rough texture of burn scars against her palm. "You never stopped being Jason. Surviving doesn't make you less than who you were. It makes you more." A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Sheriff Collins burst through the door, rain dripping from his jacket. "We've got movement in the trees, multiple heat signatures approaching the cabin." Jason stood immediately, a new steadiness in his posture. "Hargrove." "How would he know we're here?" Emma asked, fear climbing her spine again. "Because I wanted him to know," Keller admitted from across the room. "I called him after Jason arrived, told him I was ready to talk, to make a deal." "You set us up," Sheriff Collins growled, drawing his weapon. Keller shook his head frantically. "No, I called him before your arrival. I was trying to save myself, but then Jason made me see that I've been a coward for 5 years. I was about to call you when you showed up." The FBI agents were already moving to defensive positions around the cabin as headlights cut through the rain-soaked darkness. 2 black SUVs pulled up, their engines idling ominously. "Everyone, away from the windows," ordered Agent Warner, positioning himself by the door. Emma pulled Jason toward the back of the cabin, but he resisted. "No more hiding," he said firmly. "This ends tonight." Through the window, they could see figures emerging from the vehicles, men in dark clothing, several carrying what appeared to be rifles. Leading them was a distinguished-looking man with steel-gray hair, impeccably dressed despite the raging storm. "Vincent Hargrove," Jason whispered, recognition flaring in his good eye. "The man who came down to the bus after the crash. The man with the knife." Sheriff Collins was coordinating with the FBI team through his radio, but the storm was interfering with their communications to the backup units. They were outnumbered and outgunned. "Keller!" Hargrove's voice boomed through the storm. "Send out the Thompson boy and you can walk away from this." Jason turned to Sheriff Collins, his scarred face set with determination. "I have a plan, but you need to trust me." Emma watched with mounting apprehension as Jason whispered his plan to Sheriff Collins. The lawman's expression shifted from skepticism to reluctant acceptance as the rain hammered against the cabin's roof. "It's too dangerous," Emma protested when Jason finally explained his intention to her. "You can't offer yourself as bait." "It's the only way," Jason replied, his voice stronger than she'd ever heard it since finding him. "Hargrove won't leave without me. He spent 5 years thinking he'd eliminated all witnesses." Before Emma could argue further, the cabin windows shattered under a hail of gunfire. Everyone dropped to the floor as bullets splintered wood and shredded furniture around them. "Last chance, Keller!" Hargrove shouted through the storm. "Send out Thompson, or we burn the place down with all of you inside." Sheriff Collins nodded grimly to Jason. "Now or never." Jason squeezed Emma's hand once before crawling toward the back door, where Agent Warner waited to implement their hastily formed plan. Emma watched helplessly as her brother disappeared into the storm, circling around to approach Hargrove's men from an angle they wouldn't expect, while FBI agents repositioned to spring their trap. 1 year later, Emma's rental car climbed the familiar winding road toward Pinewood. The summer sunshine filtered through the dense pine forest, casting dappled shadows across the newly paved asphalt. The road had been improved as part of the federal infrastructure grant the small village had received after the media attention surrounding what newspapers had dubbed the Riverside Miracle. The village itself came into view, transformed, yet somehow still the same. Fresh paint brightened the small storefronts, and a new community center stood where once there had been only an empty lot. Emma smiled at the Welcome to Pinewood sign, no longer weathered and faded but proudly restored, with a smaller plaque beneath it, commemorating the 14 lives lost in the Riverside Eagles tragedy. She drove past the diner, rebuilt after the shooting and now thriving with a mixture of locals and the steady trickle of tourists drawn by the dramatic story that had unfolded here. Morgan waved from the doorway, his grizzled beard now neatly trimmed, a symbol of Pinewood's subtle evolution from isolated enclave to recovering community. Emma's destination lay beyond the village center, down the now familiar road that led to Mrs. Reed's property. Except it wasn't just Mrs. Reed's anymore. The original cabin had been expanded, a new wing added to accommodate frequent visitors, and a small guest house constructed nearby. A sign at the entrance read simply, "Thompson Reed Home." As Emma parked, the front door opened. Jason stood waiting, his scarred face breaking into a smile that transformed his features. Though the physical marks of his ordeal remained, the haunted look in his eyes had diminished. He walked toward her with only a slight limp, another improvement over the past year. "Right on time," he called, his voice still raspy but stronger than before. "Everyone's waiting." Emma embraced her brother tightly. "How's the therapy going?" "Slowly," Jason admitted as they walked toward the house. "But I'm remembering more things, good and bad." Inside, Mrs. Reed was preparing lunch while carrying on a lively debate with Emma's father about proper seasoning for grilled trout. Their mother sat nearby, helping a group of local children with an art project spread across the dining table. The scene of comfortable domesticity was still occasionally surreal to Emma, this blended family that had formed from tragedy. "How's the drive from Portland?" her mother asked, rising to embrace her. "Better now that they've finished the highway repairs," Emma replied, accepting a glass of iced tea from Mrs. Reed, who had become something between a grandmother and an aunt to her over the past year. The events of that stormy night at Keller's cabin had changed everything. Jason's plan, risky though it had been, had worked. By appearing to surrender himself to Hargrove, he had drawn the man into the open just as FBI reinforcements arrived via helicopter, the storm having broken enough to allow their approach. The ensuing confrontation had resulted in Hargrove's arrest and the death of 2 of his hired men. The subsequent trial had dominated national headlines for months. Keller's testimony, along with the delivery driver's footage recovered from the USB drive, provided overwhelming evidence of Hargrove's guilt. The conspiracy had extended far beyond high school sports gambling, reaching into corrupt local officials who had helped cover up the crime. 8 people ultimately faced charges ranging from conspiracy to murder. For Jason, the aftermath had been a complex journey of healing and rediscovery. The media attention had initially been overwhelming, with news outlets offering enormous sums for exclusive interviews with the miracle survivor. He had declined them all, preferring instead to focus on his recovery and on establishing a new life that honored both his past as Jason and his years as Thomas. After lunch, Jason led Emma to a cleared area beside the house where a small sports field had been constructed. A dozen children between 8 and 14 years old were already gathering, wearing matching green and yellow jerseys. "The Pinewood Eagles," Jason explained, a touch of pride in his voice. "We practice 3 times a week." Emma watched as her brother moved among the children, demonstrating proper passing technique with patience and gentle encouragement. The small, rural school that had never had a sports program now fielded teams in several sports, funded partially by donations from the Riverside families who had found a measure of closure in supporting Jason's new purpose. "You're good with them," Emma observed when Jason returned to her side during a water break. "They don't care about the scars," he replied simply. "To them, I'm just Coach Thompson." Later that afternoon, Jason asked Emma to walk with him to the small cemetery at the edge of the village. The path was familiar now, worn smooth by Jason's frequent visits. At the center stood a simple memorial, 14 granite stones arranged in a circle around a statue of an eagle in flight. Each stone bore the name of a Riverside Eagles player, or Coach Stevens, with birth dates and a single shared date of death. Jason knelt to place fresh flowers at the base of the memorial. "I still talk to them sometimes," he admitted. "Tell them what I'm doing, how the kids are progressing." "I think they'd be proud," Emma said softly. "I hope so." Jason rose, turning to face the setting sun that painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber. "I spent so long not knowing who I was, Jason or Thomas. Now I understand I'm both, and neither." Back at the house, Jason led Emma to his room, where he had mounted a display case on the wall. Inside was the faded, tattered Riverside Eagles jersey with the number 12, carefully preserved behind glass. Beside it hung a new jersey, Pinewood Eagles, green and yellow, but with the number 7 emblazoned on the back. "Why number 7?" Emma asked, touching the glass gently. Jason smiled, the expression crinkling the scar tissue around his eye in a way that had become endearingly familiar. 7 lives, like cats. It's how many chances I think I've been given." That evening, the extended family gathered on the porch as twilight settled over the mountains. Mrs. Reed told stories of her Thomas in the early days, making everyone laugh with tales of his stubbornness during recovery. Emma's parents shared memories of young Jason, his childhood exploits and teenage achievements. The painful years of separation had not been erased, but the new bonds formed in their wake had created something resilient and genuine. "I've been thinking about going back to school," Jason mentioned during a lull in the conversation. "The physical therapist thinks I could train to do what she does, help people recover from trauma." "That would be perfect for you," Emma agreed, seeing how naturally this new direction grew from his experiences. As darkness fell completely, Jason and Emma walked to the edge of the property, gazing up at the stars that shone with particular brilliance in the mountain sky. The village lights twinkled below them, and in the distance, the memorial's small solar lamps created a gentle circle of illumination. "You know what I've learned?" Jason said after a comfortable silence. "We're not defined by what we survive, but by what we choose to do with the time extra that's given to us." Emma nodded, leaning her head against her brother's shoulder. The journey that had begun with her desperate search in a storm-battered car had led here, not to a perfect ending, but to something perhaps more valuable. A continuing story with chapters yet to be written.